U.S. President Barack Obama faced a number of major challenges overseas this year. He tried to keep European allies united in the face of Russian aggression, and he made the controversial decision to reestablish diplomatic ties with Cuba. That was the top story. And for a look back at this year's foreign policy challenges, we have former U.S. State Department official Anthony Salvia, Rosa Alonso, who joins us. She's a technology blogger. Back with us is adjunct professor David Casavis, and back with us also our own Arise News Washington, D.C. correspondent Colin Campbell, who joins us. Of course, Russia dominated the headlines for much of the year, and it's like one of those movies now that they make that you have to stay through the credits, because right at the end of the year, Barack Obama makes this major surprise announcing the reestablishment of relations with Cuba. What kind of a significance is this for his administration? Rosa.
I think that it is incredibly significant. It's funny you say the Russia story, because there is a parallel story that I think media in the U.S. hasn't picked up, and that is that there has been a lot of activity by Russia in mainland Cuba. So from my perspective, I think it's a move in the right direction if it's going to impact the lives of the people of Cuba, and that remains to be seen because we don't have enough details other than, the cigars are being sold a little cheaper, et cetera.
David, this is another thing that he sort of did unilaterally. Yes. At the end of the day, will it happen with a Republican Congress?
The question is perception. Many of the Republicans see the Castros as at the end of their ropes. And the question is, do you want to play it out until they're finished, which would probably be 2018, and then do something, or do you want to start something now? I think they are at the end of their ropes. If they're going to collapse, we'll get a better deal out of it, which means bye-bye communism.
Colin, what is your sense there in D.C. in the Beltway? When this happened, obviously it was a surprise to everyone, even though the administration had been working on it for months. Moving forward, though, do you see some of that initial pushback starting to dissipate, or is it getting stronger?
Well, you're going to see some initial pushback. Of course, you have Senator Marco Rubio, who has already talked about how this would be a bad idea for the U.S. to normalize relations with Cuba. But, of course, you have the agricultural industry, which was really coming out in favor of normalizing relations with Cuba. And if the agricultural community puts pressure on Republicans in Congress, we may see an easing of some of the resistance that Republicans have initially shown. We also have to remember the other surprise here, President Obama talking about a possible embassy in Iran in the future, which is something that I'm sure gave some people, a little bit of confusion going into the new year.
Confusing to say the least, but let's go back to the more dominant story of the year in terms of time, and that is basically the reestablishment of the Cold War, Anthony, with the partial collapse of one Ukrainian government, and then the invasion of Crimea by Russian troops. Now, in retrospect, with oil prices falling, is Putin in a much weaker position now moving into 2015 than he was when this all started?
Well, certainly the economy is in trouble. I mean, it was heading toward recession anyway, even before sanctions happened and the ruble collapse and all that business. So they're already heading towards trouble. The sanctions and the ruble collapse have not made it any easier. And in fact, you're looking forward to 2015, you can expect that whole situation to get worse. Now, will this have any kind of role in terms of accomplishing what the U.S. wanted to accomplish? Now, you may recall that when Obama put in place sanctions, the idea was to give them an incentive to get out of Crimea and to halt aid to the pro-Russian insurgency in eastern Ukraine. That's not going to happen. I mean, that's since and this is the problem with sanctions, that you can't back away from them because it's a question of face. So you look at Cuba.
In the beginning, he described the West as a toothless tiger. Clearly, he's starting to, because of the oil, he's starting to feel the pinch of the sanctions that were issued. Before, not a problem. Now, with the ruble collapsing, a much bigger deal, right?
That's true. But he hasn't played all of his trump cards. I mean, his really trump card is to begin demanding payment for oil and gas in rubles, which he hasn't done yet, or for that matter, in euros. In other words, to strike at the petrodollar, which is the third rail of U.S. foreign policy. It's the essence of what the U.S. is all about. If he does that, then there could be major blowback.
Rosa, 20 years ago, if there is a ceasefire in Europe, between two warring factions, you couldn't really tell if it was true or not. But now, with the technology, we know that all of the talk of ceasefire doesn't really exist. I mean, there have been 3,000 deaths since the last so-called ceasefire. Does this change how foreign policy, how negotiations take place moving forward in Europe?
Absolutely. We're now in a world stage. Technology enables us to not only watch movements, but create social movements, and we're witness to them, and we share the information. We're communicated, we're connected across the world. So yes, it does. And so the politics and all that backdoor policy work is actually taking place in a very open stage. So I think our governments have to weigh in on what's happening in social media as they're negotiating behind the scenes on actual policy, which is being reflected.
Well, part of this theater, David, is the drama of the downing of MH Flight 17, yes, which was captured on a cell phone. Does anybody face an ICC tribunal for that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think anything's going to happen.
Do you think it was a war crime?
It was part of a war, and we shot down a plane in Iran years ago, and we didn't get docketed for it. I don't think anything's going to happen, period. I'm sorry, I don't see it. You can talk all you want. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be stonewalled. That's it.
It's absolutely not clear who was responsible.
So you think that that's sort of the end of it, and those people will get no justice?
What's interesting is that the Russian side keeps saying, like, let's pursue this, let's get to the bottom of this, because the American side doesn't seem to want to talk about it. So if the American side doesn't want to talk about it, nothing's going to happen.
He's right.
Okay, we lost Washington correspondent Colin Campbell, but we still can say thank you to David Casavis, Rosa Alonso, and as always, Anthony Salvia. Some of you will be coming back to talk about some other subjects. But right now, we go to Arise News business editor Andrew Schmertz, who has a recap of the biggest business stories of 2014.
The headline for the year in business starts with the word oil. Oil has been on a cascading trip down since the start of the third quarter. From a high as much as $110 a barrel this summer, oil prices slid to $55 by winter. That is the fastest decline in years, and oil now is at a 5-year low. It is a drop that, on balance, is good for the American consumer.
Now that energy prices are falling, I'd expect that to provide a boost to consumer spending growth in the fourth quarter, and it looks like it's going to be a very good holiday season for retailers.
But falling oil prices cause substantial pain to the energy sector and to countries that rely on oil revenue. For Russia, a country that began the year strutting tall after its role in Ukraine and flexing its power in Eastern Europe, the economic outlook has turned dismal.
I think if you factor in the oil price fall, the impact of sanctions and everything else that goes with that, and the political uncertainty that you have building in Russia at the moment, then the outlook is even worse than many people would fear.
U.S. stocks outperformed many analysts' expectations this year, thanks to an accommodating policy by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank and a steady improvement of the nation's gross domestic product. The Dow and S&P 500 posted one record after another. The Dow posted gains of about 12%, in large part because interest rates remain historically low. And the Fed chairwoman says the central bank will be, quote, patient before raising interest rates.
As progress in achieving maximum employment and 2% inflation continues, at some point it will become appropriate to begin reducing policy accommodation. But based on its current outlook, the committee judges that it can be patient in doing so.
And many economists say fundamentals for U.S. companies will continue to improve as well.
Well, it's always a tough call, but basically I think we're in a decent position. I mean, next year the thought is that S&P earnings will probably grow about 8 to 10%.
Finally, it was the year of the IPO. The market for initial public offerings roared back in 2014. The biggest of them all was Chinese e-commerce site Alibaba. It debuted on the New York Stock Exchange and quickly became one of the world's most valuable tech companies. But it wasn't alone. GoPro turned in a 310% increase, and new biotech firms that went public saw gains of 32%. What to expect in 2015? Most say more of the same. falling oil prices, rising equities due to low interest rates, and more trouble in Europe that the U.S. hopes to stay out of. Andrew Schmartz, Arise News.
And this is Arise America.